The hold smelled like wet stone and old iron, the way every border garrison does when the autumn rains come down off the Ashfin Range, and the garrison staff have been burning green wood for heat, because the dry supply hasn't arrived yet. I knew this because I had ordered the dry supply 3 weeks ago, and the order had, apparently, gotten lost somewhere between the capital and Fenwick Station, the way things always do when the man responsible for logistics knows the king won't be coming in person to notice. I wasn't coming in person. I was coming as Wren, a name I'd used twice before, belonging to a common border guard who existed only in the Fenwick Garrison's supplemental roster, and in the mind of the garrison captain, Aldrich Noss, who was the only man in the hold who knew what I actually was. He'd nearly broken his jaw keeping the shock off his face when I'd arrived at the supply entrance 3 days before the candidates. I'd told him to treat me exactly like any other supplemental. He'd said yes, my, and I'd given him a look and he'd finished, yes, Wren. I had been on the throne 11 years. I had sent away 17 arranged candidates in that time, not cruelly and not arbitrarily. I simply knew each time within the first hour. My wolf knew faster than that. There was nothing there, no recognition, no pull. The bond that was supposed to make the world tilt did not tilt, and I was not willing to bind my life and my kingdom to a woman for reasons of political convenience when I had been told, clearly and early by my father and by every record in the archive, that the bond was real, that it was unmistakable, and that pretending otherwise was the fastest way to produce a miserable king and a miserable Luna and a miserable court for the next 4 decades. 3 new candidates had arrived the week before. My council had selected them with care. They told me, this time with real care, with an eye toward character and not merely bloodline. I had listened to the description of each and felt nothing, and I had decided without telling my council, because telling my council anything that made them look foolish in advance only made them obstructionist afterward, that I would go to Fenwick myself before the formal presentation in supplemental guard cover and see the 3 of them in ordinary circumstances, unguarded, not performing. It was a reasonable plan. I'd done it before, twice, at other garrison holds, and both times I'd confirmed what I already suspected within 48 hours and saved everyone a week of ceremony. I was on my 3rd day of exactly this when Myra Voss arrived. She came through the eastern gate at mid-morning, on the back of a supply wagon that had clearly had a difficult night on the mountain road. One wheel was newly patched, and the canvas cover had a tear in it that had been repaired with what appeared to be a man's belt. And she climbed down without waiting for anyone to help her, handed up a coin to the driver, and turned to look at the garrison hold with an expression that I could only describe as professionally resigned. She was not one of the 3 candidates. I would discover this within the hour. She was a seamstress, contracted to repair and replace the garrison's ceremonial flags before the winter inspection, which was in 3 weeks and which the flags were, apparently, in no condition to survive. She had a case of supplies, a roll of finished fabric, and a letter of commission from the garrison's administrative office. She checked in at the gate registry with a guard I recognized as Paul, gave her name and her business in a voice that was clear and unhurried, and then asked, with no particular expression, whether the garrison had a room she could use as a workroom, or whether she'd be working in the hall. "Hall," said Paul. "Fine," she said. That was it, no complaint. She picked up her case and her roll of fabric and went inside. My wolf, who had been quiet and professionally uninvested for 3 days of watching 3 carefully selected candidates move through the hold in their best traveling clothes with their best manners, did something I had not felt him do in 11 years. He lifted his head. I made a note of this the way I made notes of everything, precisely, without elaborating on it until I had more information. My wolf had a broader range of interest than I generally gave him credit for. He could wake to a threat or a complication just as readily as to anything else. Myra Voss was an unplanned presence in a controlled situation. That was reason enough for attention. I told myself this while I watched her carry her workroom across the garrison hall and set it up beside the south window with the systematic efficiency of someone who had done this in 40 garrison halls before this one. It was plausible. I was almost persuaded. The three candidates were, by the third day, becoming distinguishable from one another. The first, I did not know their names, in keeping with the protocol of not knowing anything that would let my wolf anchor prematurely, was careful and gracious and laughed at exactly the right moments, which meant she was watching for when to laugh. The second was quieter, genuinely so, and had a habit of reading in the evenings that I respected, though my wolf found her about as interesting as he found the flagstone floor. The third was the most vivid. She had opinions, sharp ones, and she stated them. But her opinions were all about things that didn't matter, and she'd shown no curiosity about anything that did. I had been a king for 11 years. I knew the difference. On the third day I was assigned to the hall, which was where supplemental guards were generally put when there wasn't anything specific to guard. It was the kind of assignment that was, in ordinary circumstances, mildly tedious. Stand near the wall, watch the fire, look available. In these circumstances, it meant standing near the wall 20 feet from where Myra Voss was working on the garrison's flags, and I had nothing to do but watch, so I watched. She worked the way I imagined a person would work if they had long ago made their peace with the fact that no one was watching them and adjusted their pace accordingly. Which is to say, she worked quickly, without flourish, with the kind of attention to the specific problem in front of her that reminded me of the way my better advisors read documents. She did not look up very often. When she did, it was to check the light, or to look for a tool she'd set down, or once to watch a pair of junior guards arguing across the hall about something that could not, from their body language, possibly have mattered. She watched them for a moment, and then she went back to her work, and I thought I saw the corner of her mouth move. Not a smile, quite, more like someone confirming a theory. I found that I was curious about the theory. This was not, strictly speaking, relevant to my purpose at Fenwick. On the fourth morning, the incursion alert came in from the eastern perimeter. A pack of unmapped wolves moving through the mountain pass, not hostile but not identified, and under the border protocols that meant Fenwick Station went into lockdown until the identifications were complete or the pack was escorted clear. This was routine. I had been in 3 border lockdowns in cover before, and they lasted between 18 hours and 4 days. And they were, fundamentally, boring in a way that was different from the boring of ordinary garrison duty, because in a lockdown you couldn't even move around much. The complication in this case was that Myra Voss was now locked in the garrison with us. She appeared not to consider this a significant complication. When Captain Noss announced the lockdown status to everyone in the main hall, candidates, garrison staff, supplemental personnel, and the various administrative civilians who'd been in the hold that morning, she listened, asked one question about whether the workroom access would be maintained or whether she'd need to store her materials, was told she could maintain access, and went back to her workroom. The candidates reacted with varying degrees of composure. The first was careful and gracious about it, which was consistent. The second accepted it calmly, which I found genuinely admirable. The third had opinions, sharp ones, about border protocols in general, which I found, in this particular instance, less admirable than I might have in an abstract sense, because the border protocols existed for good reasons, and she had not asked what they were before forming her opinions. I spent the first day of the lockdown doing supplemental guard things, perimeter checks, equipment inventory, 2 hours standing at the south gate while another guard went to eat. My wolf spent the first day of the lockdown being quietly but persistently interested in the direction of the south window. I told him to stop it. He did not stop it. That evening, in the garrison's common hall where everyone took their meals during lockdown, I sat with the supplemental staff at the long table on the east side, and for the first time, found myself in relatively close proximity to Myra Voss, who was sitting at the end of the table because she was civilian staff and civilian staff sat at the ends, not through any deliberate slight. It was simply the garrison's custom. And she sat there with the same professionally resigned expression she'd arrived with and ate her dinner with efficient attention. The garrison cook had made something that could charitably be described as barley stew. Myra looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up and found the cook across the hall and said, in the same clear, unhurried voice she'd used at the gate, "Is there more of the bread from yesterday, or did we finish it?" "Finished," said the cook. "That's a loss," she said, without visible anguish, and turned back to the stew. Paul, sitting 2 places from me, leaned over and said under his breath, first person to say anything about the stew all week. "Is the stew a known problem?" I asked. "Standing problem," said Paul. I looked at Myra Voss eating the stew with the expression of someone determined to honor the principle of the thing even if the thing itself was not very good. And my wolf, who had been quiet for all of 6 minutes, made a sound I had not heard from him since I was 23 years old and standing at the edge of a mountain field in the summer with the sun on the grass. I put down my spoon. This was going to be a problem. The second day of the lockdown I arranged, without any particular subtlety that I hoped would register as subtlety, to be assigned to the hall again. I was a supplemental guard, and supplemental guards were where they were put, and if I was put in the hall repeatedly, that was the captain's doing, and nothing I could be accused of engineering. Nas, when I'd arranged it with him at dawn, had looked at me with the face of a man who had known his king for 11 years, and was choosing, for both their sakes, to find this entirely routine. "Hall again, Wren," he'd said. "Thank you," I'd said. She was working on the largest of the flags, the garrison's formal winter banner, 3 meters of dark blue wool with the border hold seal that needed, she had explained to the hall at large on no particular occasion, to be completely re-hemmed because whoever had hemmed it last had used a technique that was inappropriate for wool of this weight and had apparently never been corrected. She said this not with grievance but with the tone of someone noting a fact that explained a previous mystery. "How long does it take to re-hem?" I asked. She looked up. She looked at me for a moment, and I was aware at that moment of what I looked like. A common border guard in a standard-issue wool coat, unremarkable, mid-30s, nothing about me that suggested anything beyond what I appeared to be. I had been told many times that in cover I was completely convincing. My wolf was currently doing something complicated that I was trying very hard not to let register on my face. "Depends on the hem," she said. "This one, 2 more days if I have the light I need." "The south window is a good light." "It's a reasonable light," she said. "Better in the mornings." She looked at me a moment longer with that same quality of attention, calm, not particularly warm, not unfriendly, simply exact. "You're supplemental." "Yes." "You've been in the hall both mornings." "It's where I was assigned." "I know," she said. "I wasn't asking, I was noting." And she went back to the flag. My wolf was not behaving like a wolf who had detected a threat. My wolf was behaving like a wolf who had, after 11 years of waiting, detected something entirely different, and the distinction was not subtle from the inside. I stood at my position near the wall for 3 more hours, and had what I could only describe as a serious internal conversation with myself about the situation, none of which produced any conclusion beyond the obvious one, which I was not prepared to act on yet because I was in cover, because I was a king in a border garrison in a supplemental guard's coat, and because, whatever my wolf was doing, he was still only my wolf, and the bond required confirmation. Required the kind of clarity that did not come from 2 morning conversations about hem technique and barley stew. On the 3rd day of the lockdown, Myra Voss did something that altered the nature of the situation entirely. She was working at her usual station near the south window. I was at mine near the wall. The hall was quiet in the way halls get quiet after 2 days of lockdown, when everyone has exhausted their first-day tension and settled into the long flatness of waiting. 3 of the junior guards were playing cards at the far table. The candidates were in their respective rooms. Captain Nas was in the administrative office with his radio. And Myra Voss, working alone at the south window on the last hour of the large flag, did something I had never seen a wolf do in 11 years of knowing wolves. She looked around the hall, checking who was present and where they were looking. She found me watching. She held my gaze for 1 second, measured, deliberate, the way someone holds a gaze when they're deciding something, and then she looked back at her work. And for just a moment, at the edge of her shoulder, under the collar of her coat, I saw the faintest shimmer of silver. Wolf light. The light that comes when a wolf is close to the surface and the person carrying them is not fully suppressing. Silver. I kept my face entirely still for what I estimated was 10 full seconds, which was the longest 10 seconds I had experienced since the day I had taken the throne. Silver was not a common wolf color. Silver was in the archive, in the records I had studied because they pertained to the Valdres bloodline, the old royal line that had split from the main Caldrath lineage 200 years ago and scattered, their descendants untracked for generations. Silver was the color of the Valdres mark, the inherited wolf color of a line that had royal blood and did not know it, or did not claim it, or had been keeping it quiet for reasons that were suddenly, standing in this garrison hall in my supplemental coat, becoming very clear to me. She was hiding her wolf. She had been hiding her wolf, I would later learn, since she was 17 years old, which was when her wolf had first come in silver, and she had understood immediately what that meant and what it would cause, and had spent the following 7 years being, in all outward presentations, a seamstress with no wolf and no pack standing, and no bloodline worth mentioning. I did not know this yet. What I knew, standing at my post near the wall, was that Myra Voss, who had arrived at Fenwick Station on the back of a supply wagon, with a professional resignation that I had spent 3 days finding increasingly difficult to look away from, was carrying a silver wolf, and hiding it with a precision and steadiness that told me she had been doing it for a very long time. And my wolf, who had been engaged in an ongoing and poorly concealed reaction to her existence since the morning she walked through the eastern gate, had just solved his own equation. I finished my shift. I went to see Nas. The border protocol, I said. The registration at the bonding stone. When are you scheduling that? The border security registration was a protocol that required all individuals present in a garrison hold during a coded lockdown to register at the hold's bonding stone for identity record, a formality in most cases, since the bonding stone for border holds simply recorded presence, not bloodline. It was triggered automatically on the 3rd day of a lockdown. Nas looked at me steadily. He had been looking at me steadily since day 1. He was an exceptionally composed man. Tomorrow morning, he said, all hold personnel, all civilians, all guests. All, I said. All, he confirmed. He paused, he said, anything I should know, Ren? Schedule it for 9, I said, and keep it orderly. I want everyone present. He looked at me for another moment. Then he said, yes, understood. I spent that evening watching the hall at dinner and watching Myra Voss eat the barley stew, which had been improved slightly by the addition of something the cook described as herbs, and which I was prepared to take on faith. She ate it with the same determined equanimity. The 3rd candidate had renewed her opinions about border protocols. The 2nd candidate was reading. The 1st was being careful and gracious to everyone in her immediate vicinity. I was watching Myra Voss, and Myra Voss at one point looked up from her stew and found me watching, and this time she held the look for slightly longer than was strictly neutral, and then she said, very quietly and without directing it at anyone in particular, the herbs help. They do, I said. She looked at me one more moment, and then she looked back at her stew, and there was something in the corner of her expression that I could not entirely read, and it was that, more than the silver, more than the 3 days of exactly placed attention, that kept me awake until the watch changed. The Bonding Stone chamber was below the garrison hall, accessible by a stairwell cut from the same cold mountain stone as the rest of Fenwick. The stone itself was set into the chamber's far wall, a disk of pale gray rock, man-height, with the old registration marks carved around its edge in the script that predated the current kingdom by 4 centuries. It had been installed when the border hold was first established, and it had been used routinely ever since, for identity registration and border record, except for the function it had not performed in 200 years, which was the function it had been built for, to recognize a bonded pair. A bonding stone woke when a mated pair laid their palms on it at the same time. In 200 years, it had not woken. The last time it had woken it had been the Valdres line, and that record was in the archive, and I had read it, and I was thinking about it now. I was second in line. The protocol was alphabetical, and Dravin fell early. I laid my palm on the stone. It was cool and dry and entirely quiet under my hand. The registration marks on the edge lit faintly, pale gold, the ordinary recognition light, and then went quiet again. I was registered. I stepped back. The line moved. The 3 candidates registered. The garrison guards registered. The junior staff registered. Nos registered, and he gave me a look as he stepped back that I interpreted correctly and chose not to respond to. Myra Voss was near the end of the line. Civilian staff, alphabetical, V came late. I watched her. She stood in line with her arms at her sides and her face composed, and that quality of exact, calibrated stillness that I had been watching for 4 days and had come to understand was not her resting state but her controlled state, the state she maintained when she was monitoring herself. She was suppressing hard. I could feel it at the edge of my perception, the way you feel a closed door when there is heat behind it. I moved. Not abruptly, gradually in the way of someone adjusting their position until I was at the edge of the chamber near the stone, not in the line, just present. She reached the front. She laid her hand on the stone. The chamber went very quiet, in the way that is different from ordinary quiet, and then the bonding stone lit, not the pale gold of the registration marks, but white, and then silver, and then a color I did not have a name for that was not a color so much as a quality of light, the kind that the archive described only once, in the record from 200 years ago, in the words, "And the stone remembered what it was built to do." Every person in the chamber went still. I laid my palm on the stone. And I stopped being Wren. My wolf did not rise gradually. He rose the way a king rises, completely, without apology, without the measured approach I had been applying to every interaction in this hold for 4 days. The stone under my palm went from silver to gold, and the 2 lights met in the center of the disk and the registration marks, every one of them around the edge, lit from right to left in a sequence I had read about in the archive and never expected to see, and on my wrist, through the sleeve of my supplemental guard's coat, through everything I had been covering since I arrived. The bond mark I had been born with and carried unmarked for 34 years, burned to life, in a line of silver and gold, that was entirely visible to everyone in the chamber. The stone was quiet again. The chamber was not. I looked at Myra Voss. She was looking at me, not at the stone, not at her hand, not at the marks, at me. Her expression was exactly what it had been in the hall every morning, exact calm, unhurried, with one additional element that had not been there before, which was the faintest line at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile and not quite not one. "I saw the sigil," she said. Her voice was steady. I was standing in front of her with a bond mark visible on my wrist, and a room full of garrison personnel and 3 arranged candidates and my captain behind me, and she said it the way she said everything, clear, unhurried, as if she was confirming a detail she had already accounted for. "The sigil," I said. "Inside your cuff," she said. "Day 2, the royal seal of Caldrath. You were reaching past me for the equipment box in the hall, and your coat moved." I recalled the moment. I recalled reaching past her. I had not thought my cuff had moved enough to show anything. "You've known since day 2, I said. "I suspected," she said. "I confirmed it on day 3 when Captain Noss stopped himself mid-word twice in your presence." Behind me, Noss made a sound. I chose not to address it. "You didn't leave," I said. "I have a commission to complete," she said. "The flags aren't finished." There was an extremely long silence. Then she added in the same tone, "And I had already decided before I knew who you were that I wasn't going anywhere, so it didn't change much." The chamber was very still. I was aware of it in the peripheral way. I was aware of throne rooms and war councils when the thing that mattered was happening at the center and not at the edges. You registered the edges, and then you let them be, because the thing at the center required your full attention. My wolf was not complicated anymore. My wolf had the uncomplicated contentment of an animal that had been looking for something for a very long time, and had found it in the last place it would have thought to look, which is to say in a border garrison in the Ashfin Mountains, in the company of a woman with a silver wolf and a professional opinion about hem technique. "You've been hiding your wolf," I said. 7 years, she said. "You've been hiding your rank." 4 days. "Yes," she said. "I think we can agree you got the easier end of that." I looked at her, and for the first time in 11 years, in 11 years of thrones and councils, and arranged candidates and border protocols and garrison holds smelling of wet stone and green wood smoke, I laughed. Not the measured, appropriate response to something amusing that I produced for state functions. I laughed the way a person laughs when they are surprised into it, when something lands before their composure can catch up, and it echoed off the cold stone walls of the chamber in a way that I suspected would be remembered by everyone present for a considerable time. She looked at me, and the line at the corner of her mouth became, finally, a real thing. "Good," she said. "I wasn't sure you could do that." Captain Noss, behind me, cleared his throat. What followed was not simple, but nothing was simple when it was real. The candidates were handled with respect. They were escorted from Fenwick with courtesy and proper provision, and the honest communication that the king had found his mate, which was a conclusion that landed differently for each of them. The first was careful and gracious about it, which was consistent. The second accepted it calmly, which was also consistent, and I respected her for it. The third had opinions. I found now that I respected this too. The council received the news with the particular expression of men who have spent 3 years organizing a candidate process, and have had the results arrive entirely outside the process. I watched the expression, and I said nothing helpful about it because there was nothing helpful to say, and they were intelligent enough to understand that the Bonding Stones record, which was 200 years old, and which they could verify in the archive, was not a thing that the council's candidate process had any standing to contest. Myra Voss finished the garrison's flags before we left Fenwick. I did not ask her to. She simply did, because the commission was the commission, and the winter inspection was in 3 weeks, and the flags needed to be right. She finished them on the 6th day of our acquaintance, the day after the lockdown cleared, and she brought the winter banner to the garrison's main hall, and hung it with 2 of the junior guards, and stepped back and looked at it with the expression of someone confirming that the work was what it was supposed to be, and it was. It was a very well-hemmed flag. I stood beside her and looked at it, and she said, without looking at me, "It'll hold for at least 8 years now. Whoever did it before used a running stitch for a fabric this weight. You don't use a running stitch for a fabric this weight." "I'll make a note," I said. "You're the king," she said. "You shouldn't have to make notes about him technique." "I find I want to," I said. She looked at me, and the something in her expression that I had been trying to read since the second morning in the hall, exact, calm, careful, carrying a thing she had never shown anyone, was visible now in a way it hadn't been before. Not gone, not suddenly unguarded, just allowed, as though she had decided after very careful consideration to let it be seen. "I hid my wolf because I was afraid of what claiming it would mean," she said. "What people would want from me because of the blood, what I'd lose." She paused. "I'm not afraid of that now." "What changed?" I asked. She thought about it. She said, "I watched you for 4 days being someone you weren't, and everything you were came through anyway. Your wolf, the way you paid attention, the way you were with the garrison staff. All of it." She looked at the flag. "I thought, that's a person who understands what it costs to carry something and not show it." I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "I haven't been good at carrying it quietly." "Better than you think," she said. I had never been told that by anyone who was not attempting to manage me. It landed differently from her, from someone who had watched me in a guard coat eating barley stew, who had seen the sigil in my cuff and said nothing, who had decided before she knew who I was. The bond mark on my wrist was silver and gold in equal measure. In the archive this was noted once, in the Valdres record. A king's mark meeting a silver wolf's mark produced the doubled color, which was considered in the old language the word for completion. I had read it at 22. I had not expected to be standing in a garrison hall at 34 looking at a winter banner, while a seamstress told me I was better at carrying things than I thought. I was deeply grateful that none of my council was present to observe what my expression was doing. "The flags are finished," she said. "What happens now?" "We go home," I said. She looked at me. "I've been living in Ashfin for 7 years," she said. "What's home?" I said, "That's something we're going to have to work out together." It was not a very kingly answer. It was, as far as I could tell, the correct one. We left Fenwick the next morning, in the royal transport that arrived from the capital with my personal detail, and approximately 4 times more ceremony than the supplemental guard cover had involved. Myra sat across from me in the carriage with her case of supplies and her roll of remaining fabric, because there was still fabric left over from the commission, and she was not the kind of person who left materials behind when they might be useful. She looked out the window at the Ashfin Range as we came down out of the mountains, at the cold morning light on the stone, and she was quiet for a long time. I did not attempt to fill the quiet. The quiet with her was not the kind that needed filling, it was the kind that was doing something. After a while she said, without turning from the window, "Your dry supply order is still sitting at the mountain relay station, by the way. I heard the garrison logistics officer mention it." "I'll see to it," I said. "There are 3 other holds on this road that were expecting the same supply." She turned from the window, and the exact quality of her attention was on me, fully, in a way I was already learning was one of the most useful things I had encountered in 11 years of making decisions. You might want to look at the logistics chain as a whole and not just the one order. It's been a pattern, from what I've seen at various holds. Someone in the relay system is either incompetent or redistributing. I looked at her. "You've been to other garrison holds." 7 years of commission work," she said. "I've been to 11. You notice things." I noticed things too. I had been noticing things for 11 years and had a great deal of information about a great deal of matters and had not, until approximately 5 days ago, been noticing the right things in the right garrison hall. "Tell me what you've seen," I said. And she did. All the way down the mountain road, while the autumn light came through the carriage windows and the transport came out of the Ashfin and into the lower country where the trees were still gold, she told me what she had seen in 11 garrison holds over 7 years, in the clear and unhurried voice that gave every detail its exact weight, and I listened. And I thought, this is what it is. Not the throne or the council or the archive or the 17 candidates or any of it. This, a woman who had spent 7 years watching things carefully and had never had anyone to tell them to, and a man who had spent 11 years needing exactly that, and a bonding stone that had remembered what it was built for. My wolf was quiet in the way that is different from suppression, the quiet that is not the absence of something, but the presence of something that makes the restlessness unnecessary. We came into the capital at dusk, when the light was long and amber on the stone, and when the city gates opened and the transport came through, and the people of the capital looked up from their evenings to see the royal transport returning from a border inspection. Myra Voss looked out the window at the city and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It's larger than I expected." "It is," I said. "I'll need a better workroom than the south window at Fenwick." "You'll have one. And I'll want to keep the commissions, the garrison work." She turned from the window. "I'm not good at being only one thing." "I wouldn't ask you to be," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded once in the way she did when she had confirmed a fact she needed to confirm, and turned back to the window. We were married in the capital in the first week of winter, in the hall where the bonding stone record was held and witnessed, with the full bond mark visible on both our wrists, and the council present in the uncomfortable arrangement of men who had been outmaneuvered by an outcome they would, in retrospect, have chosen themselves if they'd had the information. The court was there. The garrison commanders were there. Nas was there, looking composed in the way he always looked composed, which was the look of a man who had been asked to keep too many things quiet and was glad to be done with it. The 3 candidates were not present, which was appropriate. I hoped, and had some reason to believe from the courtesy of the communication, that each of them would find something genuine in their own time. Myra wore a gown of dark blue wool, which was, she told me beforehand, the same weight and weave as the garrison's winter banner, and which she had hemmed herself. "Correctly?" I asked. "With a lock stitch," she said. "It'll hold for 20 years. The court found this detail, when it made its way through the hall, either charming or inexplicable depending on who you asked. I found it exactly right. I was learning, fairly quickly, that exactly right was the register she occupied as a matter of course, without effort, and that this was one of the things my wolf had known from the moment she climbed down from a supply wagon in the Ashfin rain, and looked at a garrison hold with professional resignation, and went inside. When the ceremony was done and the marks were sealed and the court had done what courts do when the thing they are witnessing is real and they know it, which is go quiet, in the way that is not about protocol but about something older, she stood beside me and looked at the hall and said, very quietly, 11 garrison holds, and the one I got locked down in was the one you were in." "Yes," I said. "That's something," she said. "It is," I said. She looked at me. And whatever she had been carrying for 7 years, the silver wolf kept quiet, the bloodline held back, the long discipline of showing nothing was in her face now, not hidden, simply there, in the way things are when they no longer need to be managed. "The supply chain," she said. "I'll write up what I saw properly, all 11 holds." "I'll read it," I said. "I know you will," she said. I had been a king for 11 years. I had made decisions and held councils and managed campaigns, and administered a kingdom of considerable size and complexity. And none of it, not one morning of it, had ever felt like this, like standing in a garrison hall in a supplemental coat and being told, by someone who had no reason to lie to me and every reason to be exact, that I was better at carrying things than I thought. I carried her hand in mine for the rest of that evening, and the court that had watched 17 candidates come and go watched us instead, and the bond mark on both our wrists was silver and gold, and outside the Capitol Hall, the first proper snow of the winter was beginning to come down off the Ashfin Range in the way it does when it means to stay.